Welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Syed and I'm going to be talking about in this lecture exploring what is fasad or fasa or sin dal, right, as in Arabic. Basically corruption according to the Quran alone. And that's a topic. Now I'm getting tons of messages from all of you guys trying to explain this particular word and what does it really mean according to the Quran. Of course, corruption, in a sense, is just like a noun, right? So it's like, all right, many things can happen, but we're going to focus on what is, of course, fasad according to the Quran alone. On a side note, yes, I'm still working on the what is salat according to the Quran. I know many of you guys have already approached and messaged me regarding this particular question. So yes, right after this, I promise I'm going to go ahead and deliver the salat because I'm almost done with my research there. So those of you who are new to this channel, please subscribe, comment down below if you have any questions, of course, and of course like and hit that like button. That's much appreciated. And of course share with your friends, colleagues, and family. My name again is Dr. Syed and I'm an avid researcher of the Quran, which means of course I've already studied all the hadiths and all the sects and the history and whatnot, right? So after all of that, bottom line is the Quran alone, and that's fascinating. So go check out my other videos and you will know exactly what I mean. All right, let's dive right in. What is fasad, corruption according to Quran? So we're gonna first take a look at the meaning of fasad, which is straightforward, but you will definitely find out in the Edward Lane's Arabic Lexicon. That's what we use as the Arabic dictionary, which is by far the most used dictionary out there for Arabic language. The second agenda item is the occurrence of the word in the Quran. That's about 15 times. Please note that even though there are 15 instances of the word fasi dal, but in this particular form, right? There are other forms also, which I'm not going to cover in this lecture because it's just going to be too long. It's already long, right? I know most of you guys are always saying, hey, we're going to keep it short, right? So but I do want to highlight the other instances of this word, which is right here. So for example, this is again in the plural, mufsadun or mufsadin, mufsid, and so on. So this is the corruptors, or the spreading corruption. The first instance, the 15 words that I'm only going to cover in this lecture are related to corruption itself, right? So once we understand corruption, it's easier then to take a look at who spreads the corruption and the corruptors. So these 21 or so instances I'm not going to cover in this lecture, but the other 15 I will cover. And hopefully this will also make sense that who are these corruptors. For example, we've already covered chapter 2, which is Surah Baqarah in the 3 instances. And then in chapter 3, same. Chapter 5, chapter 7, we've also covered. In chapter 10, talks about who these corruptors are. So among those that do not believe, la yu'minu bihi wa rabbuka a'lamu. So God knows all these corruptors, right? So again, pretty straightforward. That's why I'm not covering all of the rest of the instances, just the top 15 instances as we move forward. So I just want to highlight this so you know what this is, what I'm talking about here, and then the scope and the agenda for this lecture. And likewise, the rest of the verses, like chapter 11, verse 85, or chapter 26, 27, 28, and so on. And one of the important things here I want to mention is that when we talk about Pharaoh, for example, and this is in chapter 28. This is something I just want to highlight quickly before I move into the main agenda here, which is Pharaoh was part of the corrupter also, right? So he was the workers of corruption, and that's what God says. And the reason, one of the ways to spread corruption is to make or divide people, like divide and rule, right? That concept, and that's really what he did. So Pharaoh exalted himself in the earth and made its people into sects, right? That's verse 4 of chapter 28. You can go take a look at that. And not only he divided people, but also number of among he oppressed, right? Slaying their sons. And so that's part of corruption as well. All right, but that's for a different lecture. Let's go back to our main instances, the top 15 instances of the Quran that I mentioned here as part of my agenda. And let's continue on. In the Quran, that this word occurs in one form or the other. So I've listed all of them here for reference. If you need to take notes, you can do so. And then, of course, we are also going to take a look at the meaning of corruption and who spreads it. This is, of course, within context. We always read the Quran within context. Without context, it doesn't really help a whole lot. So always read the Quran in context, which means the whole story where this word occurs. So, for example, let me give an example. So if it occurs in Surah Baqarah, which is Surah number 2, verse 11. So try to read, few verses prior and then of course after, so you really would understand what God is talking about here. All right, agenda number 3 is meaning of the corruption, like I said, and who spreads it, and of course we'll just summarize. So straightforward but very important, because this is a common thing that we see, that we don't know what corruption is. We understand what corruption is, but it has many meanings. But what does it mean according to the Quran? All right, so let's dive right in. First, let's take a look at the meaning of this word. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the Arabic lexicon, Lane's lexicon right here. Let's minimize this. Perfect. So if you navigate to, if you already have it downloaded in the PDF, if not, I will put a link in the description below, or you can just search and it's easy to find. You can download all of this in PDF format. This is the Lane's lexicon, and you have to navigate to page 2548 to find this particular word, which is fasada, right? Fasad. And what this means is, oh, by the way, if you download the PDF, it says page 2396, but when you open up the PDF, the actual PDF reader, you will see it and find it in page 2548. So I just want to clear that up. But in actuality, if you download this PDF, you will see it somewhere around 2396. But anyways, you can find the root words, and I've demonstrated in previous lectures or other videos you can take a look at. All right, so this particular word is short and concise in the dictionary. Basically, it's form of a weak authority. That's one. The other is the former being, and then so the latter and the former being also. Let's continue. So the word fasada, right, and the latter fasada or fasad or fasada, or the former is simple substitute and latter is, right? But here's the meaning, what I'm looking at here, basically. So a thing, right? And he, a man, was or became bad, evil, corrupt, unsound, wrong, wrongful, improper, unrighteousness, wicked, vicious, or dishonest, and all these other like common terms that we see regarding corruption, like spoiled, impaired, deteriorated, tainted, infected. So what this tells us, that if something is not right, in the most common sense, you could call it corruption, right? Or something that's deviating from the normal state of things. All right, but that still doesn't tell us what the Quran says. We're going to take a look at it, of course, but to give you an idea of the basic definition of the word fasada in Arabic language. And here's a good thing that I find interesting within one of the meanings for this is it became altered in its state for the worse, right? So if you change something for the worse, that's also fasada. And it became null, void, no force, or of no account. Or it came to naught or perish, right? So these are all part of the meanings of the word. Now the opposite of fasada is salaha, right? Suad lam ha, which is amal saleh, right? Inna lazina amanu wa amilu saleh, right? So that's part of the same root word. All right, so basically saying the word saleh, by the way, and I'm going to make a video on that too maybe later on, lecture means to correct yourself, right? Now there are many meanings, but it's really when God says inna lazina amanu, those, no doubt, those people who bring iman, and then of course they correct themselves, right? But amalu saleh, their actions are always correcting. So that's really the opposite of fasad, right? So if you're dishonest, you got to be honest. That is amal saleh. That's a good deed, right? That's what it is. All right, but not to deviate, but let's stick to our lecture here. All right, so this is facade, but I'm going to go down and of course look at this word also. It's all same word, facade. It also has the same set of meanings like badness, evilness, corruptness, unsoundness, wrongness, wrongfulness, and so on, right? So you get the idea. All right, perfect. Now, it's still a broad definition according to the Arabic, language or dictionary, right? All right. Before I move onto the Quran, which is our next agenda item, we are going to go ahead and take a look at the occurrences of the Quran, which is about 15 times in different surahs, and we'll explore, of course, each one of them as always, so we fully understand the concept of what the Quran is guiding us. All right, before I actually dive into the first surah, which is Surah Baqarah, verse 11, I'm going to go ahead and just Google the meaning, right? So if you just Google the word corruption, it's kind of interesting because I found it very interesting because one of the meanings, it says the process by which a word, let me make it bigger so you can actually see. So here's the meaning of corruption. The process by which a word or expression is changed from its original state to one regarded as erroneous or debased. Now that's fairly common because our words, our expressions, sort of like, can deviate, or take one thing and just, explain it in a different context. And that's more or less, if you are a student of the Quran, you will know that the Quran speaks a lot about this stuff, like words or libel or slander, and just changing things, right? For example, changing the words in the book, in the Torah, in the Injil, right? All these people that when God delivers his books, people change those books, and that's really the process or the expression. So I kind of like this because that really relates more to the Quran, not so much as just stealing something or being dishonest and then you want to be honest, right? So this is probably pretty close to what, in my humble opinion, what the Quran is also talking about, the process by which a word or expression is changed from its original state to one regarded as erroneous or debased, right? And of course, the other meaning, standard meaning, is dishonest or fraudulent conduct by those in power, typically involving bribery and so on. All right, so this is Google. You can check that out too. I just wanted to clear that. All right, let's dive right into our first instance, because now we're going to take a look at Surah Baqarah, which is Surah number 2, and we're going to go to verse 11. I have all these tabs open so I don't have to go back and forth, so it's just easy that way. I wanted to make it simpler, and of course it'll save us some time as well. All right, so this is verse 2 or verse 11, chapter 2, which is Surah Al-Baqarah. Let's dive right into this. Perfect. So let's go to verse where it talks about or uses the word, God uses the word Fasad, right? All right, so let's go to verse 11. But before I talk about verse 11, of course, there's always the context, right? But here's the word that I'm looking at where God says, tufsidu. وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, right? And when it is said to them, work not corruption in the earth. Well, what does it mean, right? So let's explore the context in this first instance. So I'm going to scroll up a little bit so you know what God is talking about here. All right, so I'm going to start, let's start from the beginning. It's only verse 11, so I'm just going to read through it. So God says in Surah Al-Baqarah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alif Lam Mim, Zalikal Kitabu La Rayba Fi, that is the covenant about which there is no doubt. Those who believe, or guidance for those of prudent fear, those who believe in the unseen and uphold the duty, and spend of what we provide them, and those who believe in what is sent to thee, and what was sent down before thee, and of the hereafter are certain. These are upon guidance from their Lord, and these are the successful. And those who are indifferent to warning, it is the same to them whether thou warnest them, or thou hast not warned them. They do not believe. Whose hearts God has sealed, and whose hearing and over whose sight is covering. And they have a tremendous punishment. And among men is he who says, we believe in God and the last day, and they are not believers. They will deceive God and those who heed warning, but they deceive only themselves, and they perceive not. In their hearts is disease, so God increases them in disease, and they have a painful punishment for about which they lied. And when it is said to them, right? So before I read the actual verse here, notice the context, right? Very easy. All right, now God says in verse 11, and when it is said to these kind of people, right, to them, work not corruption in the earth. They say, we are but those who do right. So these people are saying, well, we don't, do any corruption on earth. We don't. In other words, we're not, we are believers, because God says they're not believers, right? And they say, hey, we believe in God in the last day, but in fact, they don't believe, right? And that's part of corruption. Similarly, if I scroll up, you'll notice whether you warn them or you don't warn them, right? Or the prophet warned them or the prophet didn't warn them, it doesn't really matter. They will not believe, right? So that's part of corruption. So just follow along this thought. So keep all these things in mind before we finally summarize towards the end of this lecture what fasad means, right? What, the word tufsidun or fasada means. All right. And of course, they don't uphold their duty, which means, they don't spend, they don't believe in the other books that God sent, and so on. That's really what the context is for verse 11 in Surah number 2. So when it is said to them, work not corruption in the earth, they say, we are but those who do right. I mean, hey, they're saying we're not, spreading any corruption. We're doing things right. In truth, let's continue. It is they who are the workers of corruption, but they perceive not. Right? And when it is said to them, and I'm going to continue this because the next instance of the same word fasada is in the same chapter 2, Surah Baqarah, verse 27. So I'm just going to read through 27. You would definitely understand. All right, perfect. It's easy. All right, so let's continue. And when it is said to them, believe as mankind believes, they say, shall we believe as the foolish believe? In truth, it is they who are foolish, but they know not. And when they meet, so there are like 3 different scenarios, right, of these people. And when they meet those who heed warning, they say, we believe. So when they're among believers, they say, we believe. But when they are alone with their shaitans, they say, we are with you. We're just, mocking. God mocks them and assists them in wandering blindly in their inordinacy. This is verse 16. These are they who sell guidance for error. So their transaction profits not, and they are not rightly guided. Right? So what they're doing is, of course, selling things, for cheap, as they say, right? So they understand, they have the guidance, right? They can read the verses, they understand what God is saying, but that's not what they're actually letting other people know, right? So that's like the change of words. And that's part of corruption. So let's continue. Verse 17. So their example, now God gives an example of all these kind of people. Their example is like the example of one who kindles a fire. When it has illuminated around about him, God takes away the light and leaves them in the darkness. So simple example, boom, you light up a candle, it's light, and then there's no light. So it's darkness and light. That's part of their example. They do not see, deaf, dumb, blind, they will not return. So these kind of people who are spreading, this kind of corruption, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter to them at all because they're deaf, dumb, and blind. They will not return. Verse 19, or like a thundercloud, that's another example. From the sky, wherein is darkness, thunder, and lightning, they thrust their fingers in their ears against their thunderbolts for fear of death. But God encompasses those who spurn guidance while claiming virtue. The lightning night snatches away their sight. Whenever it gives them light, they walk therein, and when it darkens against them, they stand. And had God willed, he would have taken away their hearing and their sight. God is powerful over all things. Now God says, 2 people, right? Now, we're done talking about those kind of people. Now God's talking about all mankind, right? Verse 21. Serve your Lord. Now, this is the guidance, right? So prior to these verses are just talking about kinds of people and the kinds of corruption they spread. So here God is saying 21 in verse 21, chapter 2, O mankind, serve your Lord who created you and those before you, that you might be in prudent fear. Who made the earth for you a carpet, and the sky a structure, and sent down from the sky water, then brought forth thereby some fruits as provision for you. So make not equals to God. And you know. Verse 23, and if you be in doubt about what we have sent down upon our servant, then bring a surah, the like thereof, and call your witnesses other than God if you be truthful. But if you do not, and you will not, then be in prudent fear of the fire, whose fuel is men and stones, prepared for those who spurn guidance while claiming virtue. Verse 25, and bear thou glad tidings to those who heed warning, and do deeds of righteousness. Wa amalu salihah, right? This is the opposite of fasada. So you follow the context, right? Pretty cool. All right, so wa'amalu, and those who do deeds of righteousness, that they have gardens beneath which rivers flow, as often as they're provided with the fruit thereof, they say, this is what we've given us as provision before, and they are given thereby a likeness. And they have therein purified spouses, and they abide therein eternally. All right, now we're almost close to the second instance of the word fasada, right? So let's continue. Verse 26, God is not ashamed to present an example, be it of a gnat or what is above it. Then, as for those who heed warning, they know it is the truth from their Lord. And as for those who are indifferent to warning, they say, what means God by this example? He leads astray many thereby, and he guides many thereby. And he leads astray thereby only the wantonly perfidious. And those, this is the verse where we have this word, right? Those who declare null the pledge of God after its agreement. And of course, this is referring to Surah Al-Fatiha, right? Like, yeah, that's what the agreement is for all of us. So those who declare null the pledge of God after its agreement and sever what God commanded thereby to be joined and create corruption in the earth. Those are the losers. So once again, this is the second instance of the word وَيُفْسِدُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ, and create corruption in it. So how, another way you can create corruption is, of course, sever what God commanded. So thereby to be joined. So if God is letting us know to keep things together, to protect the relations, I'm going to come to that too, because you will see in the next instances what God means by this. Or just asking God for everything, right? Like إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. That's really the agreement, right? That we only ask you for any help, right? Everything, and then we only serve you. So notice it's na'budu, so it's like we. It's not I, it's we. So it's a collective agreement. All right, so that's the second instance, and for the Surah Baqarah. So I hope it kind of makes sense for now, right? For the word corruption and who spreads it. All right, so let's move to the next instance, which is in Surah Al-Baqarah, but of course way down at verse 205. So I'm going to open up the agenda here, just make sure. So we looked at chapter 2, verse 11, chapter 2, verse 27. And did we take a look at chapter 2, verse 30? Let's verify. Let's go back. All right, let's continue this because there's one more word instance. So, and sever what God commanded thereby to be joined and create corruption in the earth. These are the losers. How will you deny God? This is verse 28. When you're dead, he gave you life. Then will he give you death? Then will he give you life? Then to him will you be returned. Verse 29. He it is who created for you what is in the earth altogether. Then he turned to the sky and fashioned 7 heavens, and he knows all things. And when thy Lord said to the angels, this is pretty interesting. Verse 30, because this next instance of the word right here in chapter 2. So we're coming up. And when thy Lord said to the angels, I'm placing a successor in the earth. And they said, wilt thou place therein one who will do harm therein and shed blood? So qalu ataj'al fiha man yufsidu فيها. So this, successor that you're going to be placing on earth, so the angels, said to God, hey, he's going to spoil everything. He's not going to, maintain the order, right? Or he's not going to follow your commands. He's just going to do the opposite, right? He's going to be dishonest. He's going to, change words. He's going to, break the relations or everything else, right? Anything that, we know the definition of corruption. So he's not going to do all of that. So that's why they said to God, wilt thou place therein one who will do harm therein and shed blood? Because he's going to go as far as killing people, right? Right? So let's continue. When we give glory with thy praise and are holy unto thee. So the angels are saying, hey, we're within the scope. We just do what you say. We don't do any of this opposite things. So let's continue. God said, he said, I know what you know not. And of course, and then the story continues. And he taught Adam the names, all of them, then presented to the angels and said, tell me the names of these if you be truthful, and so on. So you get the idea, right? Perfect. Let's go to verse 205 in the same chapter, because there are 4 instances, 1, 2, 3, 4, within chapter 2, Surah Al-Baqarah. So I'm going to go to verse 205. All right, which I have opened right here. So I'm going to scroll up a little bit. And once again, God is talking about, and among men is he whose speech concerning the life of his word impresses thee. So this is talking about people who come to the prophet and then they praise the prophet, and they speak very good. They have this beautiful vocabulary and whatnot. So that impresses the prophet. That's what the context is here. So, and among men is he whose speech concerning the life of this world impresses thee, and he calls God to witness over what is in his heart. And he's the most quarrelsome of debaters. Right? So people are debating, khisam, right? They're like fighting, they're quarreling. And here's the word. And when he turns away, he hastens through the land to create corruption therein and destroys tilth and progeny. So once again, it's more of, destroying things, destruction. But more importantly, it's that quarrelsome of debaters, because they're changing the words. They're not, looking at this and saying, well, yeah, this is the truth, and let's tell, everyone else. No, they're not. So they're just changing. They are deviating. They're manipulating, right? For example, and that's how they create corruption. And of course, destroy land and tilth and progeny and whatnot. And God loves not corruption. Wallahu la yuhibbul fasad. So that's really in chapter 2, pretty much well explained so far. All the instances that we've seen, we have seen 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go to chapter 7, verse 56, which is right here, Surah Al-Araf, the elevations. And let's navigate to verse 56. So work not corruption in the earth after its right ordering. Now this is pretty interesting, because of course God created everything in the right order, but we are the ones, men or people, actually create all these destructions or deviances, right? All right, so before I talk about this, let's go up to and take a look at the context. So a few verses up. And here's what God is talking about, that everything I've created is in order, right? So verse 54, your Lord is God who created the heavens and earth in 6 days, then took his place upon the throne. He covers the night and day, hastening after it constantly. And the sun and the moon and the stars are made serviceable by his command. In truth, to him belong the creation and the command. Blessed be God, the Lord of all mankind. Call your Lord humbly and in secret. He loves not the transgressors. Innahu la yuhibbul mu'tadin wa la tufsidu fil ard ba'da islahiha. So he loves not the transgressors, so work not corruption in the earth after its right order. Right? So this is another meaning, or another way Quran explains that let's not be transgressors, right? So whatever the boundaries are set by God, whatever balance is that we need to, live our lives, and that's really what a balance is. The Quran just balances things. Nature balances itself, right? Overall too. All right, so God does not love the transgressors. So we know that, one of the meanings or one of the implementations in the Quran or explanations is the transgress, right? So let's not transgress. So that's the next. All right, let's move on to same chapter, verse 85. Chapter 7, verse 85. Perfect. So let's scroll up a little bit so we can read the context. So God here is talking about in Surah Araf, and he gives an examples of Prophet Lut, right? And Lut, when he said to his people, "Do you commit sexual immorality, and that none among all mankind has outdone you? You approaching men with lust rather than women? The truth is, you are a people committing excess," right? So this is another way that you're not listening to what God is commanding. You're actually going beyond what God is saying, and you're doing your own things, right? So verse 82, and the response of his people, the people of Lut, of course, was only that they said, "Turn them out of your city. They are a people who keep themselves pure." So, people are, they got together and they said, "Hey, turn Lut and his followers out of the city because they're the ones who, keeping themselves pure." Verse 83, and we delivered him and his household, save his wife. She was of those who stay behind. And we rained upon them a rain, and see thou how was the final outcome of the evildoers. That's Prophet Lut's story, short. Let's continue, and this is where the next instance of the word Fasad is going to come. So verse 85, and to Madian, their brother Shu'aib, this is Prophet Shu'aib, he said, and this is, by the way, Shu'aib was the father-in-law of Prophet Moses, Prophet Musa, right? Because in the Quran, Prophet Moses married Shu'aib's daughter. All right, so now you know. And to Madian is just a place, right, somewhere in Palestine, right, over there, Israel. He said, "O my people, serve God. You have no God but He. There has come to you clear evidence from your Lord. So fulfill the measure and the balance, and deprive not men of their things, and work not corruption in the earth after its right ordering." There you go. Same words repeated one more time, but now you know that it's, depriving people from their things, right? So we can't just go and that's really where the laws of privacy and the rights, the rights of privacy, all the laws are derived from the Quran and, of course, the Torah and Injil as well. So deprive not men of their things, and work not corruption in the earth. That is better for you if you be believers. And lie not in wait on every road. You threaten and divert from the path of God who has believed in it, and you seek deviation therein, right? So once again, that's all part of corruption, deviating from what God is saying, depriving men of their things, and so on. All right, perfect. So let's navigate to our next instance, which is chapter 7, same chapter, verse 127. So let's navigate to here. This is where the story of Pharaoh, which is pretty interesting, because let's scroll up a few verses. This is when Musa and Harun, they went to Pharaoh with God's message. So, and of course, we know the story. You probably have heard this entire story, so I'm not going to cover the entire story, just a few lines prior to where the word comes, like the Fasad words. So let's continue from verse 121 or 120. And the sorcerers fell in submission. They said, "We believe in the Lord of all mankind, the Lord of Musa and Harun." Said Pharaoh, "You believe in him before I gave you leave? This is the scheme you schemed in the town, that you might turn out its people. But you will come to know. I will cut off your hands and your feet on the alternate sides, and I will put you to death upon a stake altogether." Verse 125, they said, "We are being returned to our Lord," and these are the sorcerers, right, who's Pharaoh is threatening to kill. So they said, "We are being returned to our Lord. Thou resentest us only that we believed in the proofs of our Lord when they came to us. Our Lord, pour thou out patience upon us, and take thou us as ones submitted. And the eminent ones among the people of Pharaoh said, Wilt thou leave Musa and his people to work corruption in the land, and leave thee and thy gods, right? So here's this group of, high-end people in Pharaoh's cabinet. They're just telling Pharaoh, hey, you're going to leave Musa? Because they're going to be, spreading corruption, even though that's the opposite, right? So what is the response of Pharaoh? So Pharaoh said he, we will kill their sons and spare their women, for we have them in subjugation. So the fear of the fact that Musa is going to take, the Bani Israel, the children of Israel, out of the city and protect them, because that's why he was there and talking to Pharaoh, talking to the Pharaoh. So, and the easier answer that Pharaoh says, hey, we're going to just get rid of all the men, all the sons, right? All the boys, the males, and we're going to spare the women for it. So there's no one to fight. You see where this is going, right? Perfect. All right, so this is chapter 7. Let's go to chapter 12, verse 73. Next instance of the word fasada. This is Surah Yusuf. And this is the story where Yusuf is now the king, and he recognizes his younger brother, and then he tests them, right? So let's continue with verse 70. And when he had furnished them with their provision, he put a drinking cup in the baggage of his brother. And that's what, Yusuf did. Then a crier cried, "O you of the caravan, you are thieves." Said they, approaching them, "What is it you are missing?" They said, "We do miss the king's cup. And for him who brings, it will be a camel load, and I guarantee it." Said they, "But by God, you know we came not to work corruption in the land," right? So that's what Yusuf's brothers, on their way back with the provisions, but there was a cup, right, the king's cup, that was secretly placed in one of the bags of Yusuf's youngest brother, and Yusuf placed himself, right? So that's really what the word corruption is. They say, hey, we're not thieves, right? We're not here to steal things. So that's one of the basic definitions of corruptions as well. So that's really what it is. All right, let's move on to the next instance, which is chapter 13, verse 25. So there we go, Surah Araf, chapter 13, verse 25. Let's scroll up. All right, so verse 25, I'm going to start with 25. But those who declare null the pledge of God after its agreement, once again, that's the pledge of God and the agreement with God that man has, for example, or mankind has, is again, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, which is Surah Al-Fatiha, which is the first surah, and the middle verse. So, but those who declare null the pledge of God after its agreement and sever what God commanded to be joined. And remember, we took a look at this particular verse earlier too. وَيَقْطَعُونَ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ أَن يُوصَلَ وَيُفْسِدُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. So, and sever what God commanded you to be joined and create corruption in the earth. They have the curse and they have the evil abode. So that's really what God is. Again, make sure that we maintain the promise that we have with God. Like, we are going to always ask God for all the help, and of course only serve one God alone. That's what it is. All right, so that's chapter 13, verse 25. Let's move on to chapter 16, verse 88, which is Surah Al-Nahl. All right, so verse 88, let's take a look at that. And this is, again, the context here is talking about, if I scroll up a little bit, let's go ahead and let's start from verse number 84. And the day we raise up from every community a witness, then no leave will be given to those who are indifferent to warning, nor will they be allowed to make amends. And when those who do wrong behold the punishment, it will not be lightened for them, nor will they be granted respite. Verse 86. And when those who ascribe partnership see their partners, they will say, Our Lord, these are our partners to whom we called rather than thee. And they will extend to them the saying, You are liars. And they will extend to God's submission that day, and strayed from them will be what they invented. So again, a couple of buzzwords. It's easy. Liars, and you invent things. Yaftarun, right? So those who are indifferent to warning and forsake the path of God, we will increase them in punishment over the punishment of what they wrought of corruption. Yufsidun. So what corruption are we talking about? Yeah, straightforward, right? You invent things in God, you create your own, sayings that, hey, God says this, God says that, and this is what it's not, right? If God doesn't say anything, it's not there. And of course, liars too, straightforward. So this is chapter 16, verse 88. Chapter 17, verse 4, let's jump to that. So this is Surah Al-Isra, the night journey. And verse 4 is, And we decreed for the children of Israel in the law that you will work corruption in the land twice and wax high to a great height. So, so this is specifically for the children of Israel, that, right after, and we know that, if you read the stories in Surah Al-Baqarah and other parts of the Quran, you will see that once Moses saved the followers from Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh drowned and his whole, army drowned. Once they were saved, they started to, do corruption, right? And there are many, many instances. So if you read the whole story, it's very clear. And that's really what God is talking about. And of course, there are other, historical records they can get into, and of course, relate those to the 2 times. But I'll come up with this. This is a whole new research. I'll create maybe another lecture just on this. But this is another instance of the word corruption. All right, next instance is chapter 26, verse 152. So chapter 26, Al-Shu'ara, verse 152. And this is the story a little bit about prophet. Let me scroll up here. And God is talking about people who are not, listening, and then he, gives them punishment and so on. All right, so let's take a look at, I should be not going that far up. All right, so let's go to Prophet Thamud, right? So Thamud rejected the emissaries, or Prophet Saleh rather, when their brother Saleh said to him, Will you not be in prudent fear? I am a trustworthy messenger to you, so be in prudent fear of God and obey me. And I ask you no reward for this. My reward is only upon the Lord of all mankind. Are you to be left secure in what is there among gardens and springs, and tilled fields, and date palms with slender spathes? And to hew out dwellings from the mountains skillfully, so be in prudent fear of God. So here's the prophet, telling the people, and wa'atiyun, and obey me, and obey not the command of the committers of excess. And verse 52, here it is, those who spread corruptions in the earth and do not right. So, committers of the excess, not doing right, not listening, not obeying the prophets, not obeying God's commands. So, وَالَّذِينَ يُفْسِدُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَا يُصْلِحُونَ. It's kind of like same verses being repeated. All right, let's move on to the next one. Hope it's all kind of coming together. Same chapter 27, verse 48. This is chapter 27, verse 48. Let me verify. Perfect. So this is Surah Al-Naml, by the way. All right, so let's go to verse 48. This is where we're talking about Prophet Solomon. And of course, he sends a letter to one of the queens in Saba, or Queen Sheba, as the historical records say. So let's take a look at that. So she said, kings, when they enter upon a city, spoil it. Of Saduha. This is the word, right? It's right here in verse 34. Let me verify in the agenda I have it correctly. 27:34. Perfect. Yep. So this is Surah Al-Naml, verse 34. So here, this queen is saying, hey, if we enter a certain city, which means the city where Solomon is, where Prophet Suleiman is, we're going to be, spoiling everything there, right? So that's also corruption. Great. All right, same chapter, or verse 48, 27:48. Let's continue. So this is now Prophet Solomon, right? So he's talking about, I'm going to go to 48. I think I have it here maybe. Yep, right here. Perfect. So he said, let's scroll up a little bit. And we sent to Samud their brother Saleh, that they served God. Then were the two factions quarreling, right? So again, it's just fighting. So if you fight something, eventually it leads to corruption, one form or the other, right? So let's continue. He said, O people, why will you hasten on the evil before the good? Or that you did but ask pardon of God, that you might obtain mercy. And they said, we see an omen in these and those with thee. He said, your omen is with God. The truth is, you are a people subjected to means of denial. And then here's the word in the next verse, verse 48. And there were in the towns 9 bands which worked corruption in the land and did not right. Perfect. All right, so almost to the last instance, which is chapter 47, Surah Muhammad, I believe, and then verse 22, right here. Perfect, yes. Chapter 47, verse 22. Let's scroll up a little bit so we understand the contents. And those who heed warning, and for the, let's go up to verse 19. All right. And know thou that there is no God save God, and ask thou forgiveness for thy transgression. So once again, the word transgress, right, is related to corruption. So, and that's really what this is. So we should always seek forgiveness, wastaghfir li zambik, for our transgressions, for our excessiveness, right? Let's continue. And for the believing man and the believing woman, and God knows you're going to and fro, and you're dwelling. And those who heed warning say, oh, that a surah were sent down. Then when an explicit surah is sent down, and killing is mentioned therein, thou seest those in those hearts is disease, looking at thee with the look of one overshadowed by death. So woe to them, obedience and fitting speech. The word is speech, right? And when the matter is determined, then were it best for them that they were true to God. And here's the verse, right? An tufsidu, which is chapter 47, verse 22. And would you perhaps, if you turn away, work corruption in the land and sever your kinship? So again, the same words. Corruption in the land, which has been throughout consistent, and of course, sever your kinship. So you're going to break the relations. That's also been repeated over time, multiple times. All right, so this is let's go back to our agenda. The 15 instances of the word Fasad in the Quran, right here, and we've covered all of them. So we understand the meaning of corruption, and we know who spreads it, right? And then, of course, the conclusion for this should be straightforward, that the meanings of the word corruption primarily relates to, doing things that are not right. So if you're breaking relations, not right. If you're being dishonest, not right. If you're stealing, or, it's not right. So it covers a whole breadth of understanding, and the Quran fully explains what falls under the purview of the word corruption. So, as believers, pretty straightforward, we are to do what God is commanding us to do, and not do all of these things that I've just highlighted within this ambit of the word fasad. So one last thing I want to do before I end, by the way, I want to show you the the actual occurrences of the word, so we know as it relates to the Quran. So not just the verses, but also a whole list. So let me just switch to that. Perfect. So this is again the corpus Quran that I always use, typically to find the root words and the number of instances in the Quran. So if you do a simple Quran search, you will see that this word occurs 15 times, that we've covered all of these verses as explains everything that relates to the word corruption, right? And of course, the opposite too, like what needs to be done and what people are doing, the kinds of people who spread corruption. We've covered those. So go ahead, take a look at this. Let me know if you have any questions. And of course, as always, like, comment, subscribe. If you're new to the channel, I regularly do this research, and it takes time because, in my day job, I always do this, slowly. And that's what the Quran talks about anyways, right? So read the Quran, in small pieces and bits by focusing on what God is saying, every day. That's what I do. And apart from that, I'll do a lot of research. So let me know what you think. If you like this video, please hit the like button. Certainly appreciate that. If there are other topics you want me to cover, please post them in the comments below. I'll be more than happy to take a look at those. And thank you so much for being here. My name is Dr. Syed. Thanks for watching.